Hello, everyone, and welcome back to The Explainer. Today we are unpacking a seriously high-stakes, fascinating topic. We're getting into the anatomy of a food safety audit. Okay, let's dive right into this because we're going to look at the exact mechanisms, the science, and the rigorous checks and balances that the global food supply chain uses to protect human health. And they are doing this every single day.
Now, I know spoiled food isn't exactly the most appetizing thing to think about, but it perfectly illustrates our starting point. When we talk about food safety, we are fighting an invisible, microscopic war. For any facility producing ready-to-eat products, microbial contamination is just this ever-present threat. We're talking about spoilage organisms, the molds that just completely ruin food before its use-by date, but far more terrifying are the dangerous pathogens lurking unseen. We're talking about hemorrhagic E. coli, salmonella, listeria, and campylobacter. These microscopic villains are literally the leading causes of foodborne illnesses and massive, sweeping product recalls.
So what does this all mean? It means a microscopic failure leads to massive, macroscopic consequences. When preventative controls fail, we are faced with a pretty brutal reality. We aren't just talking about, a bad batch of product. Actually, scratch that. It's way beyond a bad batch. We are talking about staggering financial losses, the total destruction of brand credibility, and bankruptcy. In severe cases of negligence, executives even face jail time. And absolutely most importantly, these failures can result in severe illness and even death for consumers. Proactive prevention? It isn't just a good business practice. It is an absolute, non-negotiable necessity.
All right, now that we understand those terrifying risks, let's lay out our roadmap for today's explainer. First, framework and types. Second, the 5 audit steps. Third, the science of sanitation. And finally, number 4, preparing for the audit. Let's get into it.
Starting off with Section 1, Framework and Types. Let's look at the actual regulatory frameworks that keep these food production operations strictly in check.
Well, the food industry absolutely loves its acronyms, so let's quickly demystify a few of the big ones. To comply with regulations, like the Food Safety Modernization Act, facilities must have a formal written plan located right there on site. This is called HARPIC. That stands for Hazard Analysis Risk-Based Preventative Control. And it's exactly what it sounds like, right? It's a highly proactive blueprint used to identify and eliminate hazards way before they ever happen. And who manages all this? That brings us to the PCQI, or Preventative Controls Qualified Individual. This is the on-site expert who bears the heavy responsibility of developing, implementing, and presenting this HARPIC plan to auditors.
If you think of this entire safety structure like a massive preventative control pyramid, notice what is sitting right there at the very base. It's visual inspection and basic cleaning. Good manufacturing procedures, or GMPs, and basic sanitation are the physical foundation of everything else. I mean, you literally cannot successfully perform complex, high-level pathogen testing at the very top of the pyramid if you haven't mastered just basic cleaning and sanitizing at the bottom.
To maintain this pyramid, facilities undergo a few different types of audits. We generally split these into internal and external. Internal, or first-party audits, are done by the company's own employees. Think of these as dress rehearsals, right? They spot the gaps early, before the real test. External audits, on the other hand, involve outsiders. Second-party audits are when a company checks its suppliers to make sure the raw materials are safe. And third-party audits, that's the gold standard. Those are independent organizations validating a facility's standards to build global trust, gain certification, or just ensure legal compliance.
Now that we know who is auditing and why, let's move to Section 2, the 5 audit steps. We are going to step right into the shoes of the auditor and look at the actual process flow.
The anatomy of an audit is really a continuous loop. It's not a straight line with a definitive endpoint, and that's crucial because it emphasizes that a food safety audit is not just a one-time test that you cram for, pass, and forget about. It is a continuous, never-ending engine for improvement.
So, let's walk through this journey chronologically. Step 1 is planning, where the auditor heavily reviews the facility's safety management documents before ever stepping foot inside the building. If the paperwork actually holds up, we move to Step 2, execution. This is the intense on-site verification of processes and sanitation. Step 3 is corrective and preventative actions. Here, the auditor evaluates how the facility plans to fix any breaches in standards. Step 4 is verification, which simply proves those fixes actually worked in the real world. And finally, Step 5 is audit evaluation, where the auditors themselves review their own process to ensure they met their objectives and stayed on track.
Let's zoom in on that execution phase for Section 3, the science of sanitation. The auditor has officially arrived on site.
What exactly are they doing? Let's dive into the fascinating science of sanitation and the auditor's rapid-fire toolkit.
Way before breaking out the fancy lab equipment, an auditor relies heavily on their basic human senses. Visual checks are incredibly thorough. They're often using flashlights or UV blacklights to hunt for lingering biofilms in really difficult-to-clean spots, like under a conveyor belt. But it goes way beyond sight. Auditors perform tactile and olfactory checks too. Imagine an auditor running a gloved finger along a stainless steel surface just to detect a microscopic greasy residue, or using their sense of smell to catch the faint, sour odor of spoilage organisms that standard cleaning completely missed. But hey, when the senses aren't enough, we turn to rapid testing. A huge one is ATP bioluminescence testing. ATP is basically the energy source found in all living cells. So an auditor takes a special swab, wipes the surface, snaps it into a reaction tube, and places it into a device called a luminometer. In mere seconds, they get a numeric reading of exactly how much living cellular energy, which means food residue or microorganisms, is left on that surface. It provides near immediate feedback on how clean a surface actually is.
Rapid testing is also absolutely critical for allergen control. Improperly labeled or cross-contaminated allergens, things like milk, peanuts, and wheat, are a massive cause of recalls. Lateral flow devices, which honestly look and act a lot like rapid antigen tests, are often integrated directly with smartphone apps now. These allow an auditor or a quality manager to instantly detect the presence of deadly, hidden allergenic proteins right there on food contact surfaces.
Now, for the highest level of verification, we move to heavy-duty microbiology. Auditors use pathogen-specific swabbing, sending those samples straight to labs to cultivate and directly hunt for specific killers, like Salmonella or Listeria. And if a persistent contamination hotspot is found, they use advanced monitoring techniques like pulse field gel electrophoresis to literally trace the exact DNA subtyping of the bacteria. It's basically forensic science applied to food safety, tracking the precise origin of the contamination. How cool is that?
So to quickly recap this incredibly dense scientific arsenal, auditors attack sanitation from multiple angles. They use visual and physical checks for immediate baseline data, rapid tests like ATP for instant chemical feedback, microbial swabbing to hunt down specific pathogens, chemical checks like analyzing the final rinse water in machines to ensure the detergent concentrations are exactly right, and advanced DNA subtyping to trace long-term environmental trends. It is a completely comprehensive net designed so that absolutely nothing slips through.
So knowing that this intense, microscopic scientific scrutiny is coming, how does a business actually survive it? Let's hit Section 4, Preparing for the Audit. We're bringing our focus back to the business perspective to look at the ultimate checklist for success. First and foremost, the auditor needs to see your homework. Every single facility is required by agencies to have a risk-based, proactive food safety management system ready for review. Depending on the specific regulations they fall under, this might be a HACCP plan, Hazard Analysis Critical Control Point, or the HART-P plan we discussed earlier. But the absolute key here is that the plan must be comprehensive, it must be documented, and it must be actively utilized by the staff. It cannot just be sitting in some binder gathering dust on a shelf.
Here is the actionable success checklist for any facility. It starts with mastering basic knowledge. If a manager can't answer a simple question about the daily hazards of their own operation, the auditor is going to immediately question the integrity of the whole system. Next, they have to ensure those prerequisite programs like basic good manufacturing practices are flawless. They must prepare their HARPIC plan, review it in periodic meetings, and make sure all monitoring files and verification documents are perfectly organized. And crucially, they must rely on internal audits. Passing an external audit relies entirely on everyday disciplined routines. You literally cannot cram for a food safety audit the night before. It doesn't work.
And speaking of everyday routine, to stay on track across so many various, complex fields of food operations, you need simple, organized tools. A basic clipboard checklist next to a meal perfectly emphasizes that checklists prevent human error. They prove to an auditor that the food control system actually works in practice, day in and day out, helping the staff focus on the completion of urgent, everyday safety tasks.
This quote from our source material really drives the entire philosophy home. Regular internal audits will allow your employees to imprint in their everyday routine the necessary proper food safety practices. You see, the ultimate goal of all these plans, the ATP swabs and the unannounced inspections, is to turn rigorous compliance into an automatic organizational habit. Safety shouldn't happen only when the auditor is watching, right? It should happen automatically, even without supervision. So,
We have gone all the way from the microscopic dangers of listeria to the macroscopic reality of global safety audits, ATP swabbing, and HARP plants. It's an incredibly complex industrial ballet that happens long before food ever reaches the grocery store. I'll leave you with this provocative thought. Considering this rigorous 5-step audit process and the intense scientific testing required just to pass it, how safe do you think the facility that processed your last meal really was? It kind of makes you look at your dinner plate in a whole new way, doesn't it? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, stay curious, and I will see you next time.